Joining me are the Labour MP Ian Murray and the Conservative MP for Faversham, Helen Whately. What did you think of his performance, Ian Murray?
Well, it certainly confirmed that the new Prime Minister isn't a details person. He gave a lot of platitudes and a little bit of enthusiasm, but not really much in the way of detail. He didn't tell us where any of the money was coming from for the promises he made in terms of spending. He couldn't tell us what these mythical things are that he would have at the Northern Ireland border to stop a hard border in Northern Ireland, and he couldn't tell us what he wanted to achieve in terms of renegotiation with the European Union and whether or not he could even do it. So certainly a lot of bluff and bluster, which is what we were expecting, and I think that's what we got.
Certainly his own side seemed to think that he dealt rather more effectively with Mr Corbyn.
Well, he can talk about optimism as much as he likes, but that A, doesn't pay the bills, and B, doesn't resolve this Brexit crisis. And when you're asking and questioning a Prime Minister, certainly a new Prime Minister, about what his views are on the biggest issues that are facing the country, you'd expect a little bit more than a blood and thruster performance at the dispatch box with punching his fists on the microphone and throwing his arms around. But that's what we got. But the detail is always going to be the problem for Boris Johnson. We'll find out in the next few days if he can deliver anything that he's just said. OK, so Helen Whately, bluster, and he hasn't got the answers.
Well, I'm actually really surprised that you drew that conclusion. Actually, the conclusion I got sitting there listening to Boris Johnson on his first full day as Prime Minister, answering over 129 questions from MPs, is he covered a huge range of subjects. He had tons of detail. He had tons of facts and figures at his fingertips. So anyone who questions his ability to have the detail there, actually, I think will have thought again watching that. But what he
didn't answer quite a lot of the questions. I mean, he did give an answer, but on specifics, for example, on capital punishment, he didn't give an answer on that.
Well, he brought in a huge amount of information to drawing on both his own record and the government's record. He also obviously emphasised his determination to take Britain out of the EU on the 31st of October. As you'd expect, that was very, very clear. His determination to negotiate a deal that will get through, but to do that by being fully prepared for no deal. And also, he talked about his mission beyond Brexit, what more he wants to do for Britain, what he wants to do with the domestic agenda. For instance, making sure that we fix social care, which has been such a problem for so long, and he's going to get onto that.
Although, again, did we get any details on that? We don't even know who's in charge of that.
Well, you wouldn't expect there to be...
We might expect to know who's going to actually sort out this problem.
Well, you wouldn't expect there to be the detail of the policy at his first statement at the dispatch box. But I think what is absolutely clear is that is one of a handful of things, along with education, along with getting 20,000 more police on the beat, with boosting the economy, with investment in infrastructure and broadband, that he is determined to do to make sure it's not just about Brexit. There's much more that he'll be doing.
If Mr Johnson is so hollow, why didn't Labour go for a vote of confidence today?
Well, I can't speak for the Labour leader's office. They're going to have to determine what is best for them to bring the tactics.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Of no confidence. Well, I think it probably should have been placed today and let it fester over the summer. I mean, I think the convention is that if you put down an official opposition vote of no confidence, that would then have to be debated the next day that Parliament sits, which isn't until the 3rd of September. So we could have had that festering over the summer. They've chosen not to do that. They might have to answer why they've chosen not to do that. They keep saying it's because they won't win it. Perhaps they won't win it in any case. But the key thing here is for the Prime Minister to come to the House of Commons and talk not just to the MPs that are in that room, but to the country. He didn't apologise for all of the past things he said about Liverpool, about the problems he had in Iran with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and the comments he made there, and all the stuff he said in the past about the promises he made while running the Vote Leave campaign. None of that, all of that was challenged today. None of it was answered. So whilst I agree that he was posed 129 questions, I'm not even sure we got one answer, never mind 129. And we expect the Prime Minister, who's been campaigning at spending a lot of money to get to his Conservative electorate to get the position of Prime Minister, to at least give us something on how much it's going to cost and where the money's going to come from and what he's going to do in the European Union. He had none of the big answers.
It was 2 hours, but it was largely a restatement of positions, which you might have expected. But as far as the European Union's concerned, probably at the end of it, it's going to be more difficult to reach a deal than it was before Mr Johnson started speaking, isn't it?
I don't see that, but what I do see is that we've got 98 days until the 31st of October when we're leaving, and the preparations for no deal will be ramped up. And the EU may be sending some pretty tough messages right now. They've got some time to think, and I would think that as we get closer to that date, they will be looking at their position, because there's nothing like a deadline to make somebody sit up and think, oh, maybe we don't actually want to end up with a no-deal position ourselves, and that's something that the EU will be looking at.
Do you think Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will have to up his game now as against Boris Johnson?
Well, I think you can see the tactics that Boris Johnson wants to use today. He's certainly a more bombastic Prime Minister than Theresa May was in terms of being over the dispatch box. And I think what I would have liked to have seen from the Leader of Opposition today was everything that Boris Johnson said over the last 2 years and a forensic takedown of all of those points now, what he's promising from that dispatch box. For example, he can't go to the European Union and renegotiate a deal in the next 98 days. The European Union have said that is impossible to do, and they're unwilling for that to happen. So if we do get to the position on the 31st of October of a no deal, or indeed a very hard Brexit, how does that factor into all these spending promises that Boris Johnson just
said? So they need
to be forensic about the things that Boris Johnson has said and holding them to account, because this is about character. Being Prime Minister is about credibility and character, and I think at this moment in time, with what Boris Johnson has said over his period in office as an MP and indeed as Mayor of London, and what he's saying now are entirely undeliverable. And I think it's about character, it's about meeting your promises, and it's about credibility, and I think he's got none of those.
I mean, the one thing the Labour leadership always say is they want a general election now. Do you think perhaps they should shift their policy and say something a bit different?
Well, I think it would be incredibly strange for an opposition party not to be demanding a general election every single day of the week. I think that's natural for an opposition party to do that. I would worry if there was a general election now. Look at the polls.
Exactly.
It looks as though Labour should be 20 points ahead, not languishing on 20% or less. I think the leadership of the Labour Party have to really consider why they're on 20% or less. And if Brexit is delivered, I fear that the Brexit Party vote will transfer to the Conservative Party, and it will leave all the opposition parties languishing with what would be a pretty bad deal from the European Union, or indeed a no-deal Brexit. The country can't afford that, and that's why I think that we have to hold Boris Johnson to account, and why he didn't want to be held to account in the House of Commons chamber today, which is, I think, a dereliction of his duty as Prime Minister.
Would you be afraid of a general election now?
What I hear from my area is that people aren't calling for a general election, though Labour might say they want it but not actually trigger the process to hold one. I don't hear the electorate saying, please, can we have yet another election? What I hear is, please, can we get on with it? Let's get on with it. Let's do Brexit and move on to the other stuff.
Boris Johnson, you haven't quite answered my question. Anyway, thank you both very much indeed.